Print media has had a continuous impact on society, politics, and government since the time of the Revolutionary War. Starting from what used to be solely newspapers, print media has evolved into magazines and books, becoming an even more prominent source of news. The history of print media can be split up into several important time periods. The first important time period we will be looking at is the party press era, from the 1780s to the 1830s. In this time period, newspapers received patronage from political parties who would readily endorse the party's candidate and platform. In this time, newspapers circulated among political and commercial elite because subscription prices were high. American press grew extensively. There were only 35 newspapers in 1783, and by 1833, this number grew to 1,200. At this time, the First Amendment and Sedition Act were also enacted. The First Amendment stated that there should be no interference from Congress when it came to freedom of press. The Sedition Act made the criticism of federal government illegal and was repealed 20 years later because it was deemed a violation of the First Amendment. The second time period we will be looking at is the popular press era, from 1840 to the early 1900s. This time period was characterized by the rise of penny press newspapers, which were cheap, tabloid style, and mass-produced. New York Sun, America's first penny press newspaper, sold for a fraction of the cost of earlier newspapers and made newspapers available to lower labor classes. Investigative journalists, called muckrakers, were a key part of this progressive era. Figures like Ida Tarbell and Upton Sinclair exposed the rampant political and societal corruption and turned local issues into national issues. During this time period, there were also newspaper wars between Pulitzer and Hearst. In order to outsell the other newspaper, they would sensationalize stories, sometimes outright fabricating them. This strategy helped coin the term yellow journalism, a genre of journalism that is still alive today. The dramatic style of yellow journalism was a catalyst that helped push the U.S. to war with Spain by generating public support for the war. The third time period we'll be talking about occurs from the 1940s to present day. With the advent of the television in the 1940s as a medium for entertainment and popular culture, newspapers could only compete by taking on the role of entertaining the public as well as informing. This results in less politically focused magazines and newspapers today. However, reporting today is certainly more objective. Newspapers don't require government permission to operate and are liable for punishment for their publications only under certain restricted circumstances. Newspapers are not restricted by laws intended to protect the privacy of citizens, as in other media outlets. One of the first published newspapers was the National Gazette. It was a Democratic Republican partisan newspaper, and many articles were written anonymously and directed against the Federalist Party. Another popular newspaper was the Gazette of the United States. This was the Federalist partisan newspaper, the rival paper of the National Gazette. These two papers played the role of gatekeeper in developing early political party partisanship. Some contemporary examples of popular newspapers include the New York Times, the LA Times, the Wall Street Journal, and many others. These are national newspapers that provide the audience with up-to-date coverage on politics. For example, in this issue, the New York Times acts as both the watchdog and a scorekeeper. It gives close scrutiny of Hillary Clinton during her presidential campaign, but does so in a way that in this particular headline, it is also breaking her political reputation and potentially swaying voters. In this second article, the New York Times is debating the topic of gun control laws. This paper was published in December of 2015, a time where gun laws were a recurring topic of discussion. The publishing of this article prolonged the timeline of how long gun laws would stay in the spotlight, acting as a gatekeeper. Print media has a profound effect on society in a both narrow and broad way. In magazines and local newspapers, readers rely on print media for information about crime, local activities, jobs, events, and real estate. More so than other media sources, print offers the public a means by which they can easily access information on a range of local topics. There is also a positive relationship between newspaper readership and civic engagement. While most of print media is local and serves to inform communities about issues that are personal to them, several, such as the New York Times and Wall Street Journal, have a national audience, giving these publications a large impact on government and politics. Since their emergence in the U.S., print media has played an important role in American politics by supporting particular candidates and causes. Apart from coverage on major events and issues, newspapers offer interpretive and objective forms of news, digesting and explaining topics so that the average reader can understand. Columnists provide commentary on political events, thereby influencing the reader and altering the overall political dynamic on certain issues and candidates.